Hello, and welcome to the Spectator PM podcast. I'm Luther Abel, joined as always by the wonderful Aubrey. Aubrey, how are you doing today?
Doing well. I'm glad to be back in the US. So I just got back from a trip from Rome and Assisi over Thanksgiving. So it's a pretty fantastic trip. I wrote about it in the newsletter. Um, yeah.
So, what do you appreciate even more about Rome now having visited?
Um, I think a lot of things. I don't think I had a good feel for the layout of Rome, which is fairly important as far as literature and um, like as you're reading, like, I don't know, the Roman martyrology or whatever about the saints, or even the Bible, towards the end of the Acts, like getting a feel for how Rome actually was situated and laid out is, I feel like being there is like necessary for them. Because I didn't realize how far away like the Vatican is from like where the Forum and the Senate would have been. It's like a 30-minute walk. It's actually really, really far. As far as the Romans were concerned. Or like the Appian Way is like way out there. Like, oh, I don't know why my brain like smooshed everything together. Yeah, no, Rome is a large city. I'm like, okay. So
Yeah, I feel like we make, as described, Plato's Republic, these tiny city states in our minds for places, especially that we haven't visited. Like
yeah.
Jerusalem for me just doesn't have any living quarters. It's just all of the major exhibits or places you'd want to visit, and then I don't know where the people live. It doesn't fit in one's brain, and I suppose Rome is very much the same way. You said there were so many churches that they aren't even most of them aren't even open most of the time. There's how
A
many
lot of them
again?
aren't. I don't know if it's most. There are the number that we were given on the tour thing that I went on was 985. There may be a few, slightly fewer or slightly more. What that essentially means, though, is that you literally will have churches like, you know, I don't know, 800 feet from each other, or like corner to corner, or across the street facing each other. You're like, oh, this is maybe a little over the top. Like, how are you going to staff all these churches? I think, though, the concern when the churches were built wasn't the staffing. It was that the churches are built to commemorate something, some event, some, saint. And so it the church is a monument just as much as it is a place of worship, which is why you end up with 985.
Sure, and people, uh, worshippers would move around churches, correct? It isn't like I'm a member of Appleton Alliance Church and that's where I go every
Um,
Sunday. But
to
was there more movement?
people had people probably had parish churches. Like some of the churches, like for instance, the Institute of Christ the King has a small basilica right across from the river from the Castle San Angelo, and it's essentially like it's an oval shaped church, and all along the oval there are probably 6 or 7 different altars, um, and there's not a lot of space for like the congregants to be, because I don't think the church was ever intended for like a parish use. It was intended as a chapel for priests, because priests, I think beginning in like the 400s or 500s, have had to say like a mass every single day. And so they all need spaces for that mass. And when you're in Rome, there are a lot of priests, and therefore you need a lot of altars. Um, so that was one interesting thing. And also um, people seem to use altars to commemorate like certain saints. So like a saint's relics would be within the altar. Um, the older canon law requires that you say mass over the bones of a saint. So it's handy if you've got all of them right there, or most of them.
That is convenient, yes. Huh.
So just one of the like interesting Catholic things. And I mean, this is something I talked about in the newsletter, is like just the sheer number of saints relics in Rome is absolutely mind-boggling. Like, I live 45 minutes from Maria Stein, which is the second biggest reliquary in the United States, and it's this tiny little chapel with like little reliquaries of, I think, I don't know how many, is easily in the hundreds of different relics that were sent to the US to preserve them during World War II, and they never got sent back, mostly because those churches were destroyed. um, anyway, so I grew up doing field trips there. I was used to the idea of relics, but then you go to Rome and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many more relics all over the place.
I'm trying to think of what a Protestant relic would look like. It'd be like the pins for Awana game night, and if you grew up evangelical, you know what that is. You know, we don't have enough relics. That's something we need to consider at our next function, next potluck. That'll come up. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're back safe, and that it was an enlightening trip. Could you tell us a little bit about what's going on in Israel as well? What's the latest from there? I understand hostage exchanges are taking place. There have been some rockets fired from Gaza, sort of technically breaking the ceasefire, but Israel still has hostages it wants. What is happening right now?
Yeah, so it's a tough situation for Israel. They're definitely getting the short end of the stick compared to Hamas. So I think it was right after Thanksgiving, the first hostage exchanges started, and it was supposed to be a ceasefire that lasted a few days. A certain number of hostages were to be returned to Israel in return for prisoners and no rockets being fired. And then there was a clause about extending it. So we've been extending it day by day for the last few days, and trying to get, women and children back from Hamas. And it's interesting. I expected there to be a lot more stories about the hostages and their experience, and there really hasn't been a lot. So far, there's been like little things that have come out. There's been family members speaking about the hostages. Yeah, that was something that was kind of interesting when I was looking into it a few days ago, just reading through different accounts. I think the Free Press had interviewed somebody whose family was whose family came back, and there's not a lot to the interview. I'm like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and if I were Israel, and if I was a family member of a hostage, Israel knows that the international press does not like them, which is just such an indictment of the international press. But I do credit Israelis with kind of pushing the cameras away if there are cameras, because the last thing you want after being, I'm sure, brutalized and traumatized for it's been a month, almost 2 months at this point since the hostages were taken. These are some broken people, and giving them the space they need to hopefully recover in some capacity, I think is the right thing to do, even if for messaging it would be useful to have those accounts. I can't imagine going to someone who experienced that and saying, well, tell me how it was. Let's chat over coffee. No. I feel so for them. So thank you for catching us up on that. Now you and I have some beef that we've discussed in the past, and this is Christmas, decorating for Christmas. I am the day after Thanksgiving, things get downright Christmassy. We go get the tree. We go get the wreaths. I'm going over to Ace Hardware. They've got the best trees, $35. Beautiful, beautiful, the greatest. And throw that in the back of the SUV, and it is up and in the house already in November. My Christmas gnomes come out. We're about it. But you disagree, Aubrey.
I do, yeah.
What's the deal?
So some of this is probably how I was raised, but I mean, Christmas technically does not start until December 25th, as I'm sure you are well aware. And there's this whole like liturgical season that comes before Christmas. It's called Advent, also, as I'm sure you're aware. And I feel like as time has passed and Christmas has gotten more commercialized, we've shortened that season of Advent and we've gotten rid of the like season of preparation and the preparatory process that comes with preparing for a very large feast. As far as like American holidays are concerned, Christmas is definitely the largest feast we celebrate as a country. And as such, I think it deserves more time to prepare, more time set aside. And Advent provides a great opportunity to do that. So I'm not saying don't pull out your Christmas tree or don't start decorating the day after Thanksgiving. Just take a little more time with it, drag it out, enjoy the preparation process. And this was something I talked about in the article I wrote about it earlier this week, is that Christmas is a liturgical feast intrinsically, right? It's about the birth of Christ. We're supposed to be preparing our hearts for the coming of Christ into the world. And part of preparation is that we have to physically prepare as well as spiritually prepare, because man is both flesh and spirit. And this is probably getting maybe a little too metaphysical for what's generally a fun conversation. But at the same time, I think it's important that we match the spiritual preparation we're supposed to be doing with the physical preparation. And instead of jumping right into the Christmas season, take the time to get there. I think if you don't take the time to get there, you miss that. We have a beautiful tradition, especially the Germans have a beautiful tradition of like Advent carols that have been lost to the American people just because we don't pay any attention to them. Or and instead you just end up like listening to Oh Holy Night all December, and then by the time Christmas rolls around, you're ready to like throw that song out. Totally, it's the worst. Nobody can do it well. Not nobody. Very few people can do it well. Anyway, that's my very long metaphysical explanation for why you should wait to prepare for Christmas.
See, for me, and this is partly coming from a Lutheran background, we maintain that Martin Luther really brought the Christmas tree into the Christmas tradition. So for us, it's a way to sort of set the table, set the atmosphere. And I find that preparing the soul is best done next to a twinkling Christmas tree instead of waiting to get the twinkling Christmas tree. And I will say, I keep my Christmas tree up all through the 12 days of Christmas. I mean, that thing is just a permanent fixture in the house at the end of things. It's a little dry, but the thing about Christmas is that you need to take on, some of the dangers of flames to prepare one's heart. At least it seems to me. LED bulbs have reduced the chances of that. So, we're in a safer place. Thank you, capitalism, for that one. Or we don't have to hang candles off our trees anymore. But I don't know how one prepares without a Christmas tree. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
Don't decorate it yet.
Oh, well, I don't really decorate. That's kind of like a lady job. Uh, I I bring the
So
boxes
now
up.
you're blaming this on your wife.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm just saying we each have a role in the Christmas season, and so I go out. It's kind of you know. She forages for the ornaments, and I go hunt the great beast that is the Fraser fir. So I bring it in and I show her, look at this mighty prize that I won by going and exchanging lucre for tree. And then I bring it in and I plant it there. And, it's like the moon landing, sort of. But
Considerably less,
green.
but
Yeah. And
you
then
can also repeat it every year. So
yes, and then I bring up the boxes, and then she has the joy of decorating it and bringing out all these ornaments that she's collected over the years, and so it's a bonding thing as well. But I actually wrote a magazine piece last year about the Christmas tree and why I think it's so important for having on December 1st. So I'll link that below because I don't think I'm really conveying just how much it means to me. So yeah, that's Christmas. Now, where do you land on the war on Christmas? I think it's sort of amusing in that I don't expect secular people to celebrate Christmas. And I don't expect secular corporations to celebrate Christmas for me. Like, it's kind of like my view on the state's involvement in marriage is like it's a certificate, but it doesn't. There's no spiritual attachment or requirement there. It's just a piece of paper from the state. The important thing is going before God and one's family and saying, I take this woman, and so on and so forth. That's where I land on Christmas. I don't need anyone to tell me it's Christmas or that it's worth celebrating. It should be known to yourself and an expectation of one's faith to celebrate it. Starbucks cups do not need to tell me it's that time. But I don't know. Maybe I'm a reactionary to reactionaries. What do you think, Aubrey?
I think that, I mean, I don't go to Starbucks, but I enjoy like the Christmas traditions of certain corporations. At the same time, I think it has led to the fact, or I don't know if it's from the fact that society has removed the religious aspect of Christmas or if it's a contributing factor. It's kind of like the question of the chicken and the egg, like which comes first. Who knows? But I think in some ways, like approaching corporate Christmas is like it's unavoidable. You have to participate in it. The kids expect gifts, whether or not you want to give them gifts, or you want to, participate in the more like transactional aspects of Christmas. At the same time, you do have to make sure, and my parents did a great job of this, make sure that, Christmas is still a lot more about the spiritual side of it, Christ coming into the world. I mean, the way we did that was that I'm like, there is no presents on Christmas morning. That's not Christmas morning. We ended up going, my mom's a choir director, so we just went to all of the Christmas masses, like all in a row. So we did the midnight, and then we were up in the morning, and we did the 10:30, and we got home, we made brunch. It was about family. We had to clean, and then we got to open gifts. And I think part of that is like delay really helps. I know other families would delay, they would have 12 gifts for every kid, and then they would set them up so it was on day 1 you got one gift, day 2 you got the next gift, so you went all the way through the 12 days of Christmas. My parents never did that. They had 10. That's a lot of gifts.
That's insane. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
you'd have to have like a warehouse just to keep it all
to store the gifts.
Yeah, competing
their room
with
turns into a
Amazon.
warehouse.
A tradition that we picked up was St. Nick's, where we would have our gift
Mm-hmm.
opening on the first weekend of December. And so everything after that was celebrate Christ's birth and very little about gift giving. And also, my parents were like, yeah, you get 2 gifts and a stocking. That's it. You know what you're getting as far as numbers, so don't get your hopes up about anything else. This is the amount. And I think there has been some pushback in recent years about sort of limiting the amount of gifts because growing up in the 90s, I recall there being just some ridiculous outlays by some other kids' parents that I don't see replicated as much now, and which I'm grateful for.
Yeah,
Because if
I
your
think
kid is getting tired of opening gifts, it probably means you got too many. And it's more about the parents' satisfaction or even pride in just providing that many gifts and showing it off for the month of December with people coming through. But, that's the cynic in me. But I have very fond memories of reading out of Luke on Christmas Eve and then the morning of the account of Christ's birth, and taking more time to gather as a family, attend church, of course. And I really want to do caroling this year. You mentioned caroling, and I
oh,
think,
I love
yeah, I
caroling.
think I want to get
Fun.
some family together and go out to sort of our older acquaintances, especially the ones who have been really homebound since COVID. It's interesting how, and depressing, how especially older people have really taken to their homes and refused to go out after COVID. And it's understandable. One, scary. Two, you just kind of get used to loneliness at a certain point. But witnessing to those people, a recommendation to the listeners, all several of you, please think about it. uh, so speaking of Christmas traditions, Henry Kissinger passed. It has nothing to do with Christmas. Henry Kissinger recently passed, and it was interesting going to read the comments of our memoriam piece regarding him, because there are a lot of people who just hate the guy's guts, and then there are others who acknowledge whatever faults the man might have had, while still saying the U.S. is better for having had him in a leadership position than not. And so James McGee wrote for us, and Jim comes from a background similar to Kissinger in the sort of foreign policy sector. And I guess all I'll say for Kissinger is growing up, escaping the Holocaust, serving in World War II, and recognizing that there are powers in the world that cannot understand anything besides hard force. Like that's all they know. And there are brutal regimes that the only way you're stopping them is through kinetics and explosives. And that's a language that Kissinger knew and spoke fluently. And so I'm grateful that he existed. And I guess my only regret is that he didn't have someone who was a little more cautious to counsel him, who he respected enough to moderate some of his choices. But again, it's another, the Teddy Roosevelt about the man in the ring. When you're making decisions that you think will protect U.S. interests, you don't know those outcomes until they occur. And so you talk about Cambodia and other places in Southeast Asia, and I'm glad it wasn't me who had to make those decisions. I'll put it that way. And I'm glad, especially as we look at figures like Joe Biden and the Jimmy Carters of the world, who are so soft that they allowed these terrible regimes to build strength, to grow, that there are other men like a Kissinger, like a Reagan, like, yeah, we're not going to allow that. It stops. And it's going to be painful because stopping murderers takes force. So I guess that's where I land on Kissinger. Aubrey, anything you like to say?
Yeah, not really. Not I don't really have a lot to add to that. I feel like you were saying, as you were saying before the show notes, or while we were talking about what to talk about, it's always a fun conversation. Um, there's definitely been a movement to just condemn the man and everything he did, and I think those movements lose track of the fact that when you're in the seat of power, making those types of decisions is extremely difficult. You don't have 2020 vision, and you make mistakes and make bad choices. It doesn't mean you're a bad guy. At the same time, I saw among some conservatives a tendency to react 100% to that and like adopt Kissinger as their own and be like, no, he was actually a great, and without recognizing that he made mistakes, as every man does. And I think that there's a good balance to strike there, that you have to strike there to be honest about his legacy. But at the same time, like, he also did just die. So you can't really, like, it's too soon to dance on the guy's grave. Give it, 50, 100 years. Because when it comes down to it, we actually haven't seen, the way all of his decisions are going to play out in the long run. Like, we can't totally figure out his legacy just yet. It takes years for that. I mean, we're still, the world is still processing things that happened during the Cold War and the first half of the 20th century. And that's before Kissinger was an active figure, or in some cases even alive. So yeah, I don't know. Patience and taking time and not saying like the first thing that pops into mind, I think, is an important thing for journalists, especially on both sides of the issue.
No. Agreed. Dadgummit. Let it be said. So some book recommendations. You said you were reading Hilaire Belloc's Free Press on your flight. Could you give us kind of a primer on what good old Belloc boy was talking about?
Yeah, so Hilaire Belloc he's an interesting figure. He was early 20th century, late 19th century. He was a politician in England, and he had a quick tongue and a quick wit. He was half English, half French, and so he's got these like short little like children's verses that are hilarious. They're the best thing ever. But this is one of his more serious works, talking about the rise of independent journalism and its role as a reaction to the rise of like corporate media back in the early 20th century, which is really interesting to read because I felt like a lot of the things that he's complaining about, talking about, conservatives in the 21st century can, it's like he's writing for us, but he's writing a century before us, which is so weird sometimes when you get that. It's funny to like, he was like listing his recommendations and he's got like the New Republic in there. I was like, oh, they're still around. I would call them more mainstream media now, but they are still around.
Yeah.
And just like, it was a really interesting like conversation about the way censorship works, even before social media, which is surprisingly similar to the way it works now during, with social media. The whole like advertiser thing and that Elon Musk is actually dealing with right now, or like the struggle that small independent newspapers have with investigative journalism or reporting like straight news is really difficult because you don't have the sources, and it's hard to convince people to talk to you when your readership is not the size of, the BBC or the New York Times. So yeah, it was a fascinating read.
Yeah, it's a reminder that free speech is always under assault.
Yeah. Yep.
Because we all want to control narratives. It's a human instinct. We want to curtail things that criticize us or threaten us, and we want to, promote that which boosts us up. And a free press is vital to that effect, even if it looks ugly day to day. It's called the first pass at history, and it's true. It's pretty rough in many cases, and I have to credit Twitter with its ability, especially recently under the headship of Musk, to, between that and Substack, promote quality writers who just couldn't get into sort of legacy publications. And it allows sort of citizen journalists to write while still holding full-time jobs elsewhere. Because to be employed in journalism is a rare thing. Aubrey and I are extremely fortunate in that regard. And if you're doing journalism right, you're probably never going to get rich doing it. And it's also, I think, with the Substack model, the ability for people in highly specialized industries to write about those industries is crucial, because even having some background in engineering, I cannot write about what's happening in those industries the way another, like a 30-year vet could, who's working at Oshkosh Truck, defense contractor, what have you. Maybe he couldn't write anything, but even under a pseudonym. But that's the advantage that the internet gives us, that these sites that are devoted to free exchange can offer us. So something to be grateful for today, even if it is frustrating because most journalists are idiots. And I accept that. You can call me an idiot anytime, email me. You're not telling me anything I don't know already. So my pick for this week is Snoopy's Guide to the Writing Life. And I actually have it on display behind me there by the little fireplace. And I've always appreciated Snoopy because it's really just Charles Schulz writing from his desk about what it is to write full time. And as an English major, I just need to overanalyze for a minute and say Snoopy on top of his doghouse, exposed to the elements with only his typewriter, is really how it does feel to write for you all, where you are exposed to everything, the good and the bad, and you're just locked in with this piece of cast iron, I suppose, maybe steel. I have an IBM wheelwriter actually over here, and it's really just a conversation between you and God and you and your conscience a lot of days. Like what will fulfill this story's requirement? What is good enough that contributes to the conversation while still getting it out in a timely way that it meets the cycle where people will see it? And so there are all sorts of writers who actually have little blurbs in the book commenting on Snoopy's writing. And so even if you kind of just scratch things down from time to time, I recommend the book. You'll definitely recognize yourself in there, even if it is a beagle who's thinking these things. So article recommendation. Aubrey, you suggest Paul Kenger's, our ignorant education secretary, screwed up like the most famous Reagan quote of all. Do I have that right?
Yes, yeah. So it was just a funny piece of news to begin with. The education secretary um misquoted Reagan to say that, like, the line his line, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help," was like a positive thing, rather than the negative thing that Reagan initially intended it to be. It was like the most, I don't know, like, there's a phrase for it and I'm forgetting the phrase. I'm trying to wipe cliches out of my
A
mind.
faux
So
pas,
I mean, it is a faux pas, but there's something else. Um,
misattribution. But like he just took the last half, which is hilarious to me, which is that I'm
yeah,
from the government, I'm here to help.
it's
No,
like the whole point though is like that's a bad thing.
right.
um, so it was a fantastic piece of, like, misspeaking, misquoting, but then Paul's treatment of it was amazing. Paul knows Reagan very well. He's a Reagan scholar, and yeah, his analysis of it was just excellent. Um, so I really appreciated that piece this week.
Yeah, I gotta go check that out again. It's definitely worth sitting down and reading because yeah, you'll be laughing throughout. My pick is Bruce Bauer's Napoleon review, the latest uh, Ridley movie, and it's it's a doozy. If you're even an amateur historian, it will probably kill you. Uh, and I think the worst part is it doesn't even have the the magnetism of like a gladiator, where you're just like, oh, you're just in it for the guy. You know, you want to swing the sword for him, you want to protect his back. And this Napoleon is just the most blah, gray dude. He's twice the age um, that Napoleon was at the time. There's all sorts of weird sexual stuff happening that needn't be in there. Um, it's a disappointing movie, start to finish. I'm interested to see if the extended version will incorporate more character development, where this movie really tried to push you from set piece moment to uh, domestic volatility moment and back again. Uh, so,
I mean, part of the problem is that Ridley chose a really difficult subject. And Bruce makes this point really well in that piece, is that Napoleon as a historical character does not have a clean story arc in any
mhm.
way, shape, or form. He's got like 5 or 6 story arcs, and they don't really arc. Um, they kind of just crescendo and then St. Helens, and then you're like, wait, what?
Hold on.
Yeah, even from like a historical perspective, telling that story is difficult. And Ridley's trying to do it and portray the man and trying to get an understanding of the man. And I don't think anybody's figured out Napoleon. I mean, like, he's been, the hero for so many dictators, but at the same time, like, kind of condemns their efforts, like the way his life plays out. Is like, how does this mixed figure even work? He's iconic, but precisely because nobody's figured out like how he worked. Maybe it all does just come down to short man syndrome. I don't know.
Maybe I just blame the French Revolution. Call me old Berkey boy, but I without the French Revolution, you don't get Napoleon, you don't get Europe in flames, and I wonder if you then can avoid some of what became World War One, sort of
Yeah.
the precedent for that. But that's getting into Harry Turtledove.
Hypotheticals are never a good thing in history.
So we won't get into that. But definitely worth reading Bruce Bauer if you're considering watching Napoleon. And if you are just looking for something to go check out, I mean, we just haven't had that much good cinema recently. So maybe if you just want to go see some cannons fire off, that can be sufficient. Because I mean, going to the theater, you want to get that bassy rumble going on with some part of a movie. Uh, so maybe. But when a ticket's $20, that's a hard sell.
Full extreme.